WarpSpeed, released in 1993 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System courtesy of Accolade and Ballistic, is a space combat simulator where you control a little fighter ship and you partake in various missions that usually consist of blowing up every trace of bad guy in space. Sometimes you'll have to contend with side missions such as fighting rival foes, defending bases, attacking enemy carriers, and other bits and bobs, but for the most part, your main goal involves killing bad guys and living long enough to tell tall tales about your exploits. As you defeat foes and complete side missions, you'll earn points, and earning enough points will net you promotions, medals, and most importantly, more versatile craft such as it is. There are a number of individual missions for you to partake in, which changes the number of quadrants you'll have to navigate, as well as other conditions such as lack of long-range sensors and things of that nature. If you so desire, you can partake in a campaign comprising of 4 random missions, of which you can use passwords to resume the campaign at a later time. WarpSpeed was the subject of a prior video review many moons ago when it was on the Sega Genesis, and I considered that version to be an admirable attempt marred by flawed performance. In regards to this Super Nintendo version, WarpSpeed does fare a touch better than the Sega version in some regards, better visuals, better sound output, and such, but the underlying flaws of the gameplay remains apparent in this slightly better version. One aspect that this version of WarpSpeed benefits from is better control, owing entirely to the fact that the stock Super Nintendo gamepad has more than enough buttons and triggers to assign different functions, such as controlling the speed of your ship, bringing up your long-range scanner, and selecting available missile types, among other things. Warping to different sectors requires the player to bring up the scanner screen and use the D-pad while holding down any button to move the cursor to any sector you wish to warp to. Quite a bit to digest, but not too difficult to figure out. There's a bit of forward thinking in assigning the fire buttons to the triggers, a control scheme familiar to console Doom clones of the modern age. So controlling your fighter isn't that big of a deal, nor is navigating the dark reaches of space via warp drive wormholes, or maybe go the long way around and navigate some asteroid fields in the process. However, the one area that WarpSpeed utterly fails at is in dogfights against other enemy fighters. Your main weapons, whether they be the standard photon beams or any of its upgraded variants, are slow-moving projectiles that make them unwieldy to use as a main weapon, which is usually something that shoots quickly and is fairly accurate. This is neither, and what also doesn't help is the somewhat spotty collision detection. Here's the deal. If a fighter is flying at you, you might have a chance at landing a blow or two, which is usually enough to dispose of most of the minor foes. But at point-blank range where the target is occupying more than 85% of the screen and your shots are somehow whiffing this bastard, that's a problem. Because now dogfights are based more on dumb luck rather than any semblance of precision aiming and shooting. Even the homing missiles you get on later vessels only seem effective half the time. It's probably for this reason why WarpSpeed is rather lacking in the mission variety. Your main goal in each mission is to seek out all enemy ships and destroy them. And that's it. The only thing that changes in the mission parameters are the number of quadrants you could warp from, the placement of wormholes that allow you to travel between quadrants, the type of opposition, and whether your long-range sensors work or not. There are side missions and challenges that may pop up every so often that you can complete for bonus points, but these happen within the main missions and are completely optional affairs. And the main missions take a good while to complete, especially those spanning 8 quadrants, for fuck's sake. And while I do appreciate the option, if I'm going to be honest here, there's no need to attempt a campaign in WarpSpeed. The main missions on the menu are more than enough WarpSpeed for your playing pleasures. Once you play one mission in its entirety, you've pretty much played them all, and trying to play through all the missions is an exercise in tedium, and coupled with the sluggish weapons and mediocre hit detection, makes WarpSpeed even more of a chore you endure rather than a game you play, much less an experience. Even the fighters you fly feel the same. Other than ornaments and cockpit display, there's no discernible difference in speed, handling, and defenses between the lightest fighter you start off with and the heaviest fighter with the most weapons. It's just, here are some extra guns which don't seem all that different from each other, which feels rather pointless. WarpSpeed looks somewhat decent, and compared to its 16-bit blast-processed counterpart, the Super Nintendo version does sport some nicer visuals, even if it means losing the unique cockpits. Though some would consider that a good trade-off because you get more visibility. Warp effects and traveling through wormholes are done through Mode 7 scaling effects, which isn't much but is better than how the Genesis handled that sort of thing. The scaling of the asteroids and the starbase you dock with are rather smooth, the enemy fighters on the other hand not so much. Even the enemy carrier that launches ships never appears more than a little tiny thing that takes several hits to die. The design of the fighters are alright, nothing special. The mugshots during communiques aren't too bad looking, it's alright, just not all that great I guess. I do like the wormhole effect. It's simplistic as it may be, it's actually well done. WarpSpeed on Super Nintendo sports better sound quality with its sampled sounds and such, though that's not saying a whole lot since what you've got to work with is mediocre fare to begin with. WarpSpeed's musical efforts aren't fantastic, but at least they sound like something resembling music and not, well, sound effects have a bit more punch to them, though the Genesis version has better explosion sounds. Other than that, meh. Overall, WarpSpeed fares a bit better on the Super Nintendo than it does on the Mega Drive. Better control setup and slightly better presentation certainly helps in that regard. However, that's not really saying a whole lot, when the core gameplay is still a bit on the rubbish side. Again, I like the concept that WarpSpeed is aiming for, and it's something worth revisiting on better hardware, but the execution is where it falls apart. Close, but no death stick. No need to go home and rethink your life unless you consider playing WarpSpeed for either the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. Don't make it so. Don't engage. Nah, I can't think of a good joke, sorry.